Are you in a position where you're defined by your age, and that's limiting you to pursue a dream or goal you want to accomplish? The More Than Your Age podcast is about having conversations with women who fully live their lives without being dictated or defined by their age. This is a space to encourage women who feel blocked to pursue a dream or goal based on their life circumstances. Welcome to the More Than Your Age podcast. I am your host, Erica Pasvar. Let's start living life fully and become more than your age. Joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast is author Julie Cunningham. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Erica. I am looking forward to this.
I am too, Julie. We have so much to get with you. Your life, age, where you are now, your beliefs on age, and how you've had to go through a lot in life, yet life is not over and you are continuing to do things regardless of your age. I love it so much. And Julie, you grew up in a time when the expectation for women was to get married young, have children, and stay home. And I'm curious to know, how much did those cultural expectations shape your early adulthood?
Well, I never thought about it much. I wanted to get married. Kids I didn't really know about. But, as a baby boomer, that's what we all did. I mean, we are the last generation that had any expectations of just getting married, staying home, and having kids and never having a career. So that didn't bother me at all. But the thing I knew, now I grew up on a farm, all the farm kids joined 4-H. There was a boys group and a girls group. And the 4-H really was grooming us to be farmers' wives. We learned how to cook and sew and things like that related to, taking care of being a farm wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I didn't want that. I absolutely was not going to marry a farmer because, for one thing, it's a lot of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And just didn't. I was too curious, too adventuresome to settle down in that. But I wanted to get married and maybe have kids.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you when you did get married and start having kids?
I was almost 29. Let's see, I think we got married in 1979. So I was 28, just a couple months shy of my 29th birthday.
Oh, okay. So you weren't like super young, especially at that time.
No.
Now I would say, oh, 28. Yeah, that's, that's a good one. It still is a good age, even for then. I know my parents, they got married in 79 as well, and they were 26. And so I just always remember thinking, like, my mom would say, oh, yeah, I was technically old at the time of that.
Yeah.
So because you did get married at a quote unquote older age at that time,
Mhm.
did you ever feel like, oh, I'm, washed up, or it's too late? Or you said you also were kind of adventurous as well.
Yeah, not at that age, although I did have trouble when my younger friends all started getting married, or my friends started getting married. And it's like, when is it going to be my turn? But no, I didn't feel that at all then. Now, I have had
Okay.
to struggle with that in my later years.
Mm-hmm. What did you do for work, or what did life look like before you got married?
Well, I always did secretarial work. That's what I never went to secretarial school, but, and work study in college, I worked in an office. And so before I had my kids, I was always doing secretarial work, which I don't think they call it that now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more like an administrative secretary or something like that.
Yeah. Now, okay, so then you got married and you had kids. Did you have kids soon after getting married, or was it
Pretty
sometime?
soon. They were born, let's see, when were they born? 82, maybe. I was 31 when they were born.
Okay.
So that would have been early 82.
Mm-hmm.
And we had been married maybe a year and a half. But, considering I was 28 and then turned 29 in a couple months, it was like, okay, the clock is ticking. Even
Oh, yes. People still say it now, I'm
no,
like
they
hoping.
don't.
Well, I guess maybe it depends on who, because like some people will say, I mean, I had friends when in my early 30s and late 20s, they're like, oh, my clock's ticking. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not ticking. You're, you're
Right.
still fine. You're still fine. Okay. So I'm curious to know too, your opinions on this because there's been, a lot of life has been lived from that point of, and from the point of being raised to with this 4-H group of expectation of become a farmer's wife. And you said, you knew you didn't want that. Do you think the expectation that was so prevalent, like with the baby boomers of get married young, have children, stay home, do you feel like those expectations are good, are still good, are not good? Like, have they changed? Like, kind of what are your thoughts on these expectations and how that should be affected by society now?
Well, getting married young has its pros and cons. I mean, if you're gonna have kids at a fairly early point in your marriage, you want to be young. Because, I was 31, I had twins, didn't know I was going to have twins. Now I've got 2 babies to take care of. I mean, I was exhausted all the time. And here I'm just going into my 30s. But, people do lack maturity, getting married young. One of my sons got married, he was 21 and she was maybe 20, and the marriage lasted for 12 years, but there were issues that maybe would have been exposed if they had waited a little while. But I waited. I really wanted a husband, but underneath that desire for a husband was the fact that I was starved for love, coming out of an alcoholic home, and I had to pretty much finish raising myself because that's when the alcoholism was the worst in high school. I just wanted to find someone to love me. I wasn't really thinking anywhere further than that. When I was in college, I stayed in college for 2 years. I was a music major, but I never really wanted a career. It seems like all the young women now are mostly career oriented. And that's not a bad thing because in this day and age, you can't rely on a man to support you. First of all, a lot of times it's not economically feasible, and second of all, you may not find one or may not
Mhm.
want to find one. So that all played a part, and when I was in college, I was studying music composition, and the teacher said, "Well, you'll have to go on and get your master's and your PhD so you can teach in college." And I'm like, "I don't wanna teach." You know? Now granted, my feet were firm or my head was in the clouds. I was a dreamer, so I didn't really have any realistic expectations, but I just wanted to find someone to love me. And I got impatient as I got older, as each year progressed, wondering, "Am I gonna find one? Is this the right man? Is that the right man?"
Mhm.
Because that inner driving need for love was so strong.
Yeah. Well, and we'll get to this a little bit later too, but I know that was it at 60 or 63, y'all ended up ending the marriage. When you to go back to look and say, I was really like I just really wanted to love. I wanted coming from an alcoholic home. Do you feel like maybe that there were things that you ignored or didn't see, or it was like, no, it was great until it just wasn't?
Mhm. Well, you know my husband and I were very different, and he was emotionally disconnected. He did not communicate ever on more than a surface level. He thought I was just like he was. He was super independent. He really didn't need a wife, he really didn't. He was so independent. He didn't want a helpmate. And and I was very emotionally damaged when we got married. I had not had any counseling, any, healing therapy or anything. And so, I mean, the problem started on the honeymoon.
Mm.
And I, for years, blamed myself for every problem in our marriage because I was the one that was so broken. But then we moved from New York to back to his home state of West Virginia, in Morgantown, West Virginia. And there I found a Christian counseling ministry and started going to them. And I had told them, I want to deal with the roots of the issues, not just chop off the outer limbs. You've got to go down deep to the roots. And it took quite a few years. But the more I got healed, the worse the marriage got.
Oh.
Until, I remember our 25th anniversary. I was so angry. And, I was angry and critical for a lot of our marriage. And of course, that is a terrible thing to do to a person. So, my husband had his own, justifiable issues with me. But then he had his also ones that he would not deal with. And that's what it came down to. I wanted, and the Holy Spirit really drove me, pushed me to keep going, to seek that healing. I wanted to be healed as much as I could be on this side of
Mm-hmm.
heaven. He did not want that. He wanted to hide, did not want to expose himself to anyone, not let anyone know where he was at. And of course, he was emotionally disconnected, so he couldn't, you know, there was no empathy
Mm.
and sometimes not a lot of kindness. And so we ended up, by our 50s, we are living on two separate planets. And, but I was afraid to leave because of the economic situation. I knew I didn't really have any skills. I didn't have a college degree. I mean, I had skills, office skills, and I did work as a temp at WVU at West Virginia University, but I didn't have enough good skills where I could get a full-time job enough to support myself.
Mm-hmm.
So we went on like that until I realized that nothing was going to change till one of us died. If I didn't move, take a step, nothing was going to change. And the day that he came home in 2018, in January of 2018, he said, I can't do this job anymore. He worked at a chemical plant. And he said, I'm retiring in April. And I'm like, the Lord said, you're free to go now. Yeah. And so I said, okay, Lord. And that's another reason I waited, because I wanted to be sure I could hear clearly from the Lord that
Mm-hmm.
he had released me from this marriage that wasn't a marriage. I mean, in my 50s, I stopped wearing my wedding rings because I'm like, what's the
Wow.
point? This We don't have a covenant. These rings reflect something that's not true, and I'm not going to wear them. I'm not going to live the lie.
Wow. And that's a long time to be feeling alone and going through all of that you were
Mhm.
experiencing. When you were saying that in your 50s, you just, if you wanted to leave, and you also didn't get clarity on that either from the Lord, but if you wanted to,
Mm.
thought, well, I don't have the skills. I don't, how would I live? How would I survive? And then now we're at this point where he says he's going to retire. Did you all of a sudden, because I also know you went back to school too at some,
Mhm.
at 60. And so did what for you made you say, no, I can live on my own? Like, this is going to be hard, but I do have the skills. Like, were you able to get to that point and actually survive?
Well, I wasn't clear about how I would survive, and I was 67 when we divorced, and I moved down here to Texas. But it was like, I can't do it anymore. I mean, I would have walked away and left everything at the house. And I understood finally why women do that, and there was a little bit of, I don't want to say he was abusive, because he was never physically abusive, never verbally abusive, but it was the kind of neglect that left me hanging. A wife needs some kind of emotional support from her husband. You need
Hmm.
that emotional connection. That's what really makes the marriage and makes the two one beyond the physical connection. And we didn't have that, and he didn't want it. And I knew how bad a shape I was in when I got down here and was down here by myself. I was so wrung out in every way, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I felt like a washcloth that had been wrung dry and left out to hang. I mean, that's how drained I was, and I needed a period of time to recover before I could even think about getting a job. And there was enough of the divorce settlement for me to live for a few years, and I didn't have to. And then COVID hit. And so I had enough of the divorce settlement, to live through COVID. And then the money started running out, and I knew it would, but then it was like, oh my gosh, I've got to get a job. And then the Lord said, go to Kroger's and apply. Now, there's a Kroger's like a mile away from me. So he said, go to that store and put in an application. So I did, and I was hired part-time. And then that grew to full-time. Now, Kroger doesn't pay enough, to take care of all my bills, but the Lord has taken care of me, and we've managed, you know.
Yeah.
And my husband, ex-husband now, is worries enough about me still. We have an Exxon credit card together, and he pays for my gas. And he sent me money when I really needed some in a pinch. And I've tried to keep the connection open with him because, we've got 2 sons and 2 granddaughters, and I am really the only connection between him and them.
Mhm.
And, I mean, he's still connected with his children to a certain amount, but not like I am. And, one of our sons lives here, and one of our granddaughters is down here. So I felt like, the Lord released me from the marriage, but he didn't release me from the family,
Mhm.
so to speak. And during COVID, we set up on Messenger a family group to keep track of everybody, to see how everybody was doing. So, personally, I'd rather not see him again, ever again,
But
but, when
you
you're connected.
yeah, you share children and grandchildren, kinda difficult
Mm,
to do that as well. Okay, well, to go thank you for sharing all that because I know it's a lot, and even just thinking, like you said, you were 67 with the divorce, I mean, that's almost 30 years. I mean, maybe you were with him for
39, it
30.
was almost 39 years.
Oh, am I doing my math wrong? Wow. Yeah, that's a long, long time and a long time to experience everything and I'm glad that you were able to find biblical counseling and to receive that help too because there's like and how you even said too, you said, I thought I was the broken one. There's two people in a marriage and
Mhm,
but it takes work on both ends as well. Well, I wanna go back a little bit as well since,
mhm,
that happened at age 67. Your kids started college, and you got a part-time job at the college. What were you doing? Were you doing secretarial administration work at the college as well?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. And then you decide, and you can just chime in at what time. I know it was at the age of 60, you decided to enroll in college. So why did you decide to enroll at that age and at that time?
Well, I'd always wanted to go back to college, and I had looked into it while the boys were still at home, but, it just never felt right. And then this was in 2010, the fall of 2010 when I went back, and that summer, I felt like a nudge from the Lord saying, "You can go back to school now. This is the time." So, I talked with my husband. He said he would pay for it. He did not want me to get any student loans, and so I enrolled. And West Virginia University, and I think all the big colleges in West Virginia have what they call the Regents Bachelor of Arts program for non-traditional students. So I could go back to college. All my college credits from 40 years before transferred. I couldn't believe it.
Fascinating.
And so all I had to do, and they said, basically, you can take the courses you want. You don't have to declare a major. But you need to take 300 and 400 level classes. Well, at that level, they all have prerequisites. So it's not exactly like I could take whatever classes I wanted. And I still had science and math credits that I never got the first and second time in colleges. And so I took some kind of computer course for the math credit because I just am not able to do math, upper level math. And then I took a geology class, one of the big freshman geology classes. And I'd always been interested in rocks and, volcanoes and earthquakes. They're always fascinating. And of course, in Iowa, there is nothing in the part where I lived. There is nothing exciting, it's just fields of corn. So, I took a Geology 101 class and fell in love. I mean, I would come out of that class every day going, "Oh my gosh, oh wow, oh, this is so interesting." So, for the first 2 years, I went part-time and took mostly geology classes. I got on the same track as the geology majors and took some archaeology classes, including archaeology field school. And then the 3rd year, I went full-time because I'm like, "I gotta get out of here before they raise the tuition again." So, that's what I did, and I got a whole secondary education on top of what I was studying, which was interesting.
Yes, that I just that's so neat. So when you when you decide to go back, you're taking these classes with people 40 plus years younger than you. How did that impact your experience? Were there thoughts of what am I doing? I'm, 40 years older than all these kids. Like these are some youngins in here. What how did that impact your experience?
Well, I didn't really think about it. I had always related very well to my kids' friends. Like they would come over to our house, when they were in high school, and I would forget that I was the mom. I'm like, joining the conversation and everything. So I could always relate very well to the younger people. And I remember for this first big geology class, I had to take a lab to go with it. And and of course the kids were freshmen, and some of them were like, "Well, what's she doing?" They were kind of standoffish. But once I got in with the other geology majors and, I'm taking classes with them, labs, field trips, which that was interesting. The field trips were interesting. That's when I really felt my age. We just all fit in well together. And two of my son's high school friends had come back to school and they were in my geology classes.
Oh,
And I
how
already
funny.
knew, I already knew them. So I felt right at home
Yeah.
and, you know, made a couple of good friends. One was a grad student but the other one was a freshman. And so one of the labs we took in one of the upper level classes, we had to do a group project. And, as I'm thinking, oh, dear Lord, group project with a bunch of kids. But in my particular group, we had a 40-year-old that was getting his PhD or something. We had me, then one of the boys' friends who had come back to get a second degree. And then there was one girl who was the normal college age. And so our group did great.
I bet. Well, then that's neat too that there were, other people kind of going back as well. Did other students just say like, because I would think too, there's a good amount of respect of, hey, somebody's coming back
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
fulfill their degree. That's
Yeah. They didn't say much, but after I graduated in 2014, one of my younger cousins said, "You are my hero." And I'm like, "What? What? I didn't do anything. I just went back to school." See, it wasn't a big deal for me. You know, I didn't think about the kind of impression I was making. I was just more focused on the people. But I did, oh my gosh, I did have to study like mad. I mean, I thought about writing a book about my life as eating like a college student or something like that. Because, on the weeks that I would have a test, I would have to study all week, and I'd go to my husband, would you run down to Wendy's and get us supper? We ate a lot of fast food. Everybody got gift cards for Christmas.
the college diet.
Yeah.
No matter your age. That's so funny. Well, okay, can you share a little bit because you mentioned the geology field trips and there were camping trips and share a little bit about maybe one of those experiences from your with your classmates and you sleeping on the ground and you said, "Well, I did notice a difference there."
Yes. Yes. Well, on the very first field trip, we took it in the rain. And, the part of West Virginia where we lived is very hilly, not as mountainous as southern West Virginia, but the hills are pretty steep. And so, we're going up and down this hill looking at stuff. And the next day, my quads were so sore. I could hardly walk, let alone like squat. Forget that. So that was the first field trip, and we come back and we're all soaking wet. And it was like no big deal. And then the last major field trip we took, this was for the petrology class, and we're studying metamorphic rocks, which there are none in West Virginia except on the very edge on the eastern side of parts of West Virginia. So we took an overnight field trip. The professor, was only 4 years older than me. And, we set up our tents. It was in early April. Big storm front had gone through the night before. So everything was wet. It was cold, but it wasn't raining, at least. So, my husband equipped me with all the camping stuff, showed me how to set up the tent, and all that. And so the young friend who was in the group project with me, she and I roomed together. So we set up the tent. We had a ground cloth and everything. And I had taken a sleeping bag that someone had given Dan, but it was lightweight. And, we had to put all of our gear in the bus where we were sitting. There was not a separate truck for gear. And so we drive over here. We're near Baltimore and set up in a KOA campground. Well, West Virginia University has a reputation of a party school, and there's a good reason for that because drinking is, the major thing. And so we're at a KOA campground, camped near a group of Weeblies, which are like little Boy Scouts or something, I'm not sure. And the boys, bring out the booze, and they get louder as they get more drunk. And the professor is hiding in her tent with a 6-pack or a bottle of wine, and we had a couple of Muslim girls in our group. And so Courtney and I walked over to, check out, make sure they were okay. Cause the guys were like, some of the guys were kind of teasing them, and it's like not mean or anything or threatening. They weren't like that, but it's like, oh, are you sure you just don't want a drink or two? And they're like, no, thank you. No, thank you. So we asked the girls, you guys okay? And she says, oh yeah, we're fine. But see, this geology majors, it's like they formed a group. They were in the same classes together for several years. And so it was like a community, Nobody was hassling anybody or anything. But yes, they got drunk, made a lot of noise, almost got us kicked out of the campground. And it was so cold that night. I hardly slept because I'm shivering the whole time. And I'd run into the bathroom and turn on the heater, the blow dryer for the hand, and hold my sleeves up and let the air blow down through. But it was fun.
Yeah. Had you ever camped before?
Yeah, we did, when the boys were little. We went on several camping trips as a family, but mostly the Dana and the boys. It's like, yeah, you guys go camp. I'm gonna stay here by myself where it's
In the
quiet.
comfort. Yeah, have a little break. Yeah, that is so neat. And then you graduate, and you said it was your nephew or your cousin who said was just so proud of you.
Yeah, my cousin.
Your cousin.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's really neat. And you also, this is a side note, you also played the harp, right?
Yes. I have kind of made my way through the woodwind musical instruments, and in West Virginia, I discovered Celtic music, which is, Irish, Scottish, English music from the British Isles, and fell in love with it. And a harp professor moved to town, and around the same time, I got a part-time job so I could pay for the lessons, and I started taking harp lessons. And now I, could play the piano and the clarinet and the flute and the saxophone, all, woodwinds except for the piano. But the harp was a totally new experience. It's a very difficult instrument. Sounds beautiful while you're playing it,
Yes.
but I just fell in love with it, and eventually I was able to buy my own harp, a used harp. But, my harp was not, the big gold ones you see in the orchestras. Mine was what they call a Celtic harp or a lever harp. And so it's much easier. It's not as heavy. Those big golden harps are really heavy.
Yeah.
And if my teacher wanted me to move to one of those, and I'm like, we would have had to buy a new car. A different car to be able to haul it around. And my teacher started a harp ensemble, which I played in. And then I was able to persuade my husband to play with me as a duo because he played classical guitar. So classical guitar and harp, we called ourselves the Heavenly Harmonies, and, did weddings and receptions and dinners, things like that.
Wow. How old were you when you learned to play or when you started taking lessons?
I was probably in my late 40s or early 50s.
Doing it again, Julie. There we go. That's so neat. I mean, that's like just a fun little side fact and party trick. You can say, well, I play the harp.
Yeah.
Do you still play now?
Well, I try, but I have arthritis in my hands now, which is a problem with older musicians. My ex-husband can hardly play his guitar anymore. And I'm just so tired when I come home from work. All I want to do is just sit down and not move again.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, something I want to know, because we already touched base with the divorce. But I'm curious to know, because it had been, you had mentioned like for the majority of the relationship, it was hard. And you had to, grieve things and go through everything you had to go through. When you moved away, you moved to Plano, which for listeners out there, Plano is a suburb of DFW, Metroplex. When you moved to Plano and also you have COVID and all the things, how were you able to just get through the difficult days and feel like you could actually survive and just move forward?
Well, I'm a reader, and so I read a lot of books to start with. And my son had said if I go to meetup.com, I can find different groups to join in. And I mentioned this in one of my books, the hardest thing starting over is making yourself walk out the door,
Mm.
and I found a writer's critique group that met in the Willow Bend Mall right across the street from me. So I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, I'll go check this out. And it's the same group I've been with that I'm, with now. So I've been with them for 7 years, basically. And it was a very good group. And that's how I started getting to know people. Now, I wasn't interested in finding a church. I just did not want any demands on me. I didn't want to have to do anything,
Hmm.
so to speak,
Yeah.
other than just take care of myself. So that was the first step, the writers group, and then finding a grocery store and getting to know my way around a little. Now, one of the reasons I had moved down here was, and why I decided to move down here was my one son who was living in Nashville, he was divorced and his ex-wife had remarried someone from McKinney who was living up there in Nashville. And they decided they wanted to move back to McKinney. And of course, they were going to take the granddaughter, my son's daughter, who was 3 at the time. And so my son said, well, I'm going to move down there too. So then I said, because by this time he's got some kind of chronic condition, and I said, well, he's going to need backup because he won't know anybody down there. So I decided, well, Texas was not on my radar, but hey, this place is and it's flatter than West Virginia. So that was a big plus. And so we all moved down here in slightly different stages. So with his health condition, we couldn't go out and eat together, do things like that, but we could do other things together. And it was probably 2 years after living here that he started to really need my help. I started taking him to doctor's appointments. And of course, I'm not working at this point, so I'm free to do
Hmm.
that, getting him groceries and, every so often. And then I started gradually getting to know people. 3 years ago, I found the church I wanted to go to. So that introduced me to another group of people. But, I've always been a solitary person. I was an only child growing up. I was basically, except for my kids, I was a solitary person in the marriage. And so it didn't bother me
Mm.
because I had my books. My books were always the place where I went to for comfort, for friends. You know, pathetic, I know that your friends are all fictional, but
They're they're who you create. Well, okay, when you joined the writers group, had you already been writing at that point, or did you join it and then you started writing and decided to start writing your books?
I had already started writing. In fact, back up in West Virginia, I was in a writers group. I had been going probably for a year or two there, but I was still, I was a beginning writer. I didn't do a lot of writing except in school, and because I was a musician.
Mhm.
I always envisioned myself and my talents and giftings being as a musician. But really, what happened was once we stopped playing as a duo, the harp and classical guitar duo, and I went back to college, that was pretty much the end of my musical involvement. I had stopped going to the church we were going to where I was on the music team. And so I've never really gotten back into the music. So the writing kind of came to the forefront. It kind of
Mhm.
surfaced, if you will. And it was interesting. One of my sons, who were musicians as well, and, once they got out of college, that was kind of the end of the music for them. But one of them said, "We used to be a family of musicians, and now we're a family of writers." And I'm like, and I don't know how that happened, because when we were homeschooling, we didn't do much writing.
That that's funny, but I guess, as a creative, you're always a creative, right? It
Mm,
just is it just is looks different. Looks differently. Okay, well, you started taking the writing classes before you had moved here and before you had joined that group.
mhm.
When you were taking those classes, was that when you decided to write the first book? Or how did that desire come to be?
Okay. And it was a critique group, not classes.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Sorry,
okay.
misspoke. Thank you.
So I had started the book probably back in my late 50s. I had separated from my husband like the fall of 2004 through the spring of 2006, and moved to Nashville, where my son, the one that's here, was there in college with his first wife. And the Lord just dropped the title, The Orphaned Wife, just into my head, and I started working on it. But then I realized I didn't have answers for the women, because I had to live a few more years. You know, I've had to live out everything that I've written about. And it's kind of a painful way to find out what your subject's going to be. Anyway, so I stopped writing. And then I worked on it a little bit more. And let's see, I moved here in 2018. The book first came out in October of 2019, and then I re-released it in 2020. So I had joined self-publishing school, and that's an online group with the goal of really helping people to self-publish, because going the traditional publishing route is very difficult, and it's controlled by very few, 3 or 4 companies, most of which I don't think are even in the States. And
Hmm.
so self-publishing school's goal was to make writing more accessible to more people. And they teach you how to write, they teach you how to publish on Amazon. And so I joined them, and they really helped me finish the book. But it wasn't finished until I moved here and got away got away from my husband, basically. But I had wanted the concept behind the book was I wanted to help other Christian women who were in marriages like mine, the marriage which on the outside looked fine. My husband was a nice man. It probably took me a year for my to get my counselor to understand what I was trying to say, because I didn't really have the words to express what it was like. And so I wanted to provide other women what I had not had, which was encouragement, saying, "Yes, I understand where you are. You can make it. This is what you focus on, and you don't focus on your husband, because you will never change him.
Mhm.
So who do you change? Yourself." And for me, it involved a lot of emotional healing. And so the book turned out to be not so much, this is how you can live with your husband or not live with him. I never really advocated divorce, because that's a very serious thing. And you really have to hear from the Lord clearly if you're going to go through a divorce. And so it turned out that the book was more about a woman pursuing her own emotional healing. And I did mention things about my marriage in the book, but not much, because I didn't want this to be let's bash our husband book.
Mhm.
That was not my intention at all. And I was talking about my journey, not his. And so what I realized in the end, by the time I had gotten through most of my inner healing, was that is the answer. You pursue your own emotional healing, and that's all you can do, and see where it takes you. But that is key. And if people did that before they got married, rather than bringing all this emotional baggage from both the man and the woman, if you don't bring that into the marriage, then you're in a much higher level. And I think it'll be, well, marriage is never easy. I hate to
Right.
use that word, but you're kind of ahead of the game
Mhm.
if you're emotionally healed.
Yeah. Because it's so personal and even, your other books as well, very personal. But since that was the first, when you are putting something out there, it's very vulnerable, it's very scary. I mean, even doing a podcast, I've done a couple myself, and it's good for me to experience it because I'm
Mhm.
thinking, wow, it's very personal to just share, and whoever can hear it and read it for in your sake, in your experience to read it. And so when when you did put it out there, uh, how was that knowing that you're kind of laying it all out there and anyone, your children and everyone can read it and know?
Yeah, well, I didn't think about that until one of my son's friends, and I kind of knew him too because we had all been my kids had been involved in children's theater when they were in high school, and so all these other kids, they got to be a very tight group, and I got to know some of these kids too. And so now we're all adults, but, the connections are still there. So one of his friends would say, "Oh, maybe I'll, check out your book and read it." And I'm thinking, "Oh, no." He's
Don't
gonna
do
know
it.
everything about me. And that's when it hit it. I don't care about strangers reading about me. It's other people who know me.
Yeah, the people who know you, that's the scary part. Well, okay, so you have written additional books as well,
Mhm,
and now you are working on a pilot script for a TV series that Meg Parker, who is our mutual connection, wanted to work on this with you.
mhm.
And after your most recent book, Mama Was a Hippie. And so when she approached you with this idea, what did you think? 'Cause that's something big and huge, and if you need to talk about writing that book too, whatever order we need
Uh-huh,
with that.
uh-huh. Well, I was like see, I was thinking in terms of a movie because I went and saw the Jesus Revolution when it came out a couple years ago, and I kinda cried my way through that movie because it brought back so many memories. Because that was the period of time of my hippie years. So, when she said a television series, and I'm thinking movie, and we talked about why a television series would be better, and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And she had the vision for it. She has the vision for it, so I believe she's got the anointing to write it.
Mhm.
And so I'm like, "Oh, this might be interesting." And, there is a lot of television and movie activity in this area. There's a big, I don't know, something going on with movies on TV down in near Fort Worth, which I can't really remember who it is. So anyway, we've finished the pilot, or I mean the first draft. Now my other son, who went to college for he got his MFA in screenwriting. I had talked to him and said, would you kind of look at this script? And he goes, "Oh yeah, Mom." He said, "I've done script development for the last 10 years." I'm like, "Well, okay, here."
Perfect.
Yeah, and so we had just got his notes back a couple 3 weeks ago, and we just met actually yesterday, and to talk about where we're going with the script and make adjustments and everything, and his analysis of the script was so good, I'm like, "Wow, I didn't know he could do this." And so he says, "Oh, yeah, Mom." Basically, he says, "I'm a developmental editor for scripts." And I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me that's what you did? You could have been developmentally editing my books." But anyway, so now it's getting more real. And of course, Meg has more contacts, and she just came back from the El Paso movie thing and made more contacts. And so I'm like, "Hey, this could be fun. This could be a lot of fun." And since this door is opening, I feel like this is the direction we're supposed to go in,
Yeah.
and we'll see what happens.
It's so neat. I mean, what a really neat opportunity of how old are you now, Julie?
I will be 75 in a few weeks.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
okay. So 70, almost 75, and helping write this pilot for a book that you wrote. Tell us about Mama Was a Hippie so that the listeners can get an idea and check it out too.
Okay. Well, I got the idea from the same son that has the MFA. When he was in high school, he came home one day and said, "Oh, yeah, our class is talking about, the hippie movement and everything." And I said, "Just, be a smarty." I just said, "Oh, well, I could come and talk to your class." He goes, "Oh, you and every other parent." And then he left the room in a hurry. So now, 20 years later, he's like, "Oh, Mom, you ought to write a book about, your adventures." Because see, when they were growing up, I didn't talk about it very much because I didn't want to give them any ideas. Boys can be adventuresome. I'm like, I'm not telling them all about my hitchhiking experiences. And so it basically covers 1969 through 1972, and with my first 2 years in college and how I got on the hippie track, if you will. So I started off in the hippie movement and ended up as a Jesus freak because the two movements were simultaneous. They were like going side by side. And I used the analogy of two trains on parallel tracks until the hippie train crashed and burned. And then it picked up the Jesus train picked up the survivors. And so, but I felt like I needed to start kind of back at the beginning. What led me into that lifestyle? And so I talked in this book in the beginning more about living in an alcoholic home than I had in any of my other books, because my goal by the time I was in high school was to escape, to get away from home. And then, so I go to college. The first year, I was pretty normal, living in a dorm. I was a music major in band and stuff like that. And then things kind of changed the second year. And I found out, that I was only trying to fit in and be the normal college student because I wasn't. In fact, Meg and I were talking about that yesterday about, that's been my pattern, trying to fit in, but I don't. And I think a lot of creative people can say the same thing.
Sure.
And so I was always interested in occult things like extrasensory perception, reincarnation, astrology. Edgar Cayce, who is known as the sleeping prophet, he would go to sleep and could diagnose people's illnesses. And then his readings expanded into things about Atlantis and the end times and just weird stuff. But I was fascinated by him. And so I had my second year of college, I moved into an ashram, which was basically a ranch, 3-bedroom ranch house, except we all were part of the Ananda Marga Yoga Society and very much living the yogi's lifestyle, but going to college too, but focusing on living the yogi lifestyle. And then we had an opportunity to go to California. Now, I'm in north central Iowa, so we hitchhiked to California on spring break to go to an Ananda Marga conference there. And so this was the first time I'd done anything like that, and oh my gosh, I loved it. I mean, I probably took hardly any money with me. We got to see the Grand Canyon, and, we hitchhiked to Berkeley, to the ashram there, and found out even though I had written a letter telling them that we were coming, there was no room for us because there was other people that had come there before we did. So we basically kind of slept out on the streets overnight and took this bus, to Santa Cruz Mountains where this conference was being held. And it was just, a wild trip. Here we are at this conference and, the concrete showers outside, concrete co-ed showers outside where you just take your clothes off, take your shower, put your clothes back on kind of thing.
Man.
I mean, for an Iowa farm girl, it was like, I may have read a lot of books, but this was like, oh my goodness, quite an experience.
Not that 4-H training that they had for you, right?
No. And so I was really, really immersed. Was given a Hindu name and volunteered to go and basically be a missionary for Ananda Marga. And the place I chose to go was Virginia Beach because that's where Edgar Cayce's center was. And so I hitchhiked out to Virginia Beach with this guy who kind of disappeared, somewhere along the line.
Oh man, and you can learn so much more and by reading the book as well. So I want to know though, which was worse, sleeping on the camping when you were camping with the geology students, or sleeping on the concrete when you were out in California and they didn't have any room for you?
That was definitely worse because they took us, there was people on the streets everywhere.
Yeah.
And they took us to this place. There was a group of us, not just us, but the larger group, to this building. And it was like sleeping under a porch, but it was a big porch. So we put our sleeping bags on the dirt, which was a little softer than the concrete. And we've got this giant concrete building above us, and I'm like, I'm so glad there were no earthquakes that night.
Yeah.
And then they gave us vouchers the next day to get food at like McDonald's or somewhere. And, we went to this church where they let us use their bathrooms to wash up and everything. So I'm like, I'm glad I only had to do that one night.
Wow. That's all I can say as well. So, okay, what can you tell us about where you are with the pilot? You said y'all met yesterday. What are we allowed to know?
Well, we're starting earlier. We had started with my first LSD trip, but one of the key things was the Kent State shootings of the college students. That brought about a lot of chaos on the campuses all the way across the country. And that happened May 4th, 1970. And so we were like a whole year ahead of us. That was where we should have started. So and one of the comments my son said was, I want to be steeped in the atmosphere of that time period and what it was like. And so I said, okay, let's start with the campus protest after the Kent State shooting. And, we'll work our way towards moving into the ashram and then the LSD, hitchhiking and then the LSD, all of that kind of together. So, and he also said, we had planned a 30-minute show. He said, you really need to do 45 to 60 minutes to get everything in so you can develop the characters more and everything like that. So that's about all I know. Meg said she got a lot of ideas.
It's going to be
And
amazing.
this I will say this about the TV series. There will be stuff more in there than what's in the book. Because when I wrote the book, Mama was a hippie. I had my children and grandchildren in mind, and I'm like, my kids are grown men, middle-aged grown men now, but they don't need to know everything I did.
Everything.
Yeah, and I was glad I kept it clean because at work, I sold my book to several of the people at work, and one of them has a little girl who, at the time, she had just turned 11. Well, I don't know what it was about it, but she basically claimed the book for her own, and she said, "Oh, this is my book now, Mom." And so her mom brought the book back because I had signed it for her mom, and I signed a whole thing for her daughter there. And she was just enthralled, even though she's not going to know half of what I'm talking about. But I think it was the fact that her mom knew an author. Maybe. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad I didn't go into detail. But in the TV series, we are going to go a little more. Because, first of all, you've got to make it interesting
Hmm.
for people.
Yeah.
And so we will see.
Wow. That's so neat. Julie, you're doing things that I'm imagining you probably never imagined doing when you were 20,
Mhm,
living that
mhm.
that hippie lifestyle to then your 30s and 40s and learning the harp and then going back to school. You're doing all these things that eh, you just probably never imagined that you're doing. All different things
Mhm.
happen in life and they just take us down different paths that we just never thought or we never know is coming. And so I'd love this is my last question and I'd love to just hear your thoughts and your response on this. If, women yeah, we talked about this. Women can feel like it's just so hard to do things because of their age. You have a life circumstance like the divorce or, whatever it may be that's just challenging. If you could encourage one woman who does feel blocked or limited to pursue a dream or a goal based on her age or life circumstance, what would you say to her?
I would say don't listen to the voice that's telling you it's too late and you're too old, because that is something that we do have to battle. It is never too late and you are never too old. And what are your dreams? What did you want to do that you haven't done? What can you do? Are you physically limited? Well, what can you do? We had in the harp ensemble, we had an older woman who had lots of health problems. And she was a big woman, like tall, and she played one of those big harps. which, those things are like 80 pounds or more. They're heavy. And yet she was touring with our group, and she said, if I stop, it's all over.
Hmm.
And, there's a tendency, I think, Lord, I just want to sit back, go back to reading my books, have the money come in, and just retire. But, in God's economy, there is no retirement. He has something for us until the day we draw our last breath. Don't
Mhm.
give up, keep going. There's always something new to do. When my sons were in high school, one of them was taking cello lessons from a woman who taught cello and piano. And there was a woman in there with her two girls. They were probably, I don't know, maybe early high school age, maybe ninth grade, eighth grade. And they were taking piano lessons from her. And so was their mother. So we had the recital, at the end of the year. And the mom's playing in the recital too. It was painful to listen to her. I'm like, because I know how to play the piano. I'm like, oh, dear Lord. And you just grit your teeth until she's done. But she had the guts to play in front of everybody.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter how good you are. We don't have to be professional. Just, and your dreams change when you get older because reality creeps in. Menopause comes. And there's lots of things, but don't ever give up and keep going.
Wonderful answer, Julie. Thank you so much. Julie, please share where people can find your books, your website, anything you want to plug.
Okay. My books are on Amazon, and the Mama Was a Hippie is under Julie Cunningham, which is my maiden name because I wanted my classmates, my fellow classmates, to know who I was, because I'm talking about my hometown in the book. And my other books, The Orphaned Wife, Ashes on the Altar, and A Kaleidoscope of Butterflies, Women Walking in Glory, are on Amazon also under Julie Cunningham. And my website, I have a landing page, juliecunningham.author.com, for The Orphaned Wife and the other two books. For Mama Was a Hippie, it's going to be juliereevecunningham.com. It's still in the process of being built.
Well, perfect. I will put all of that in the show notes so everybody can go check it out. Julie Cunningham, thank you so much for taking the time and just sharing your heart and your story on the More Than Your Age podcast.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Me too.
If you were encouraged by today's episode, like and subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. You can find me on all of the socials at More Than Your Age. Keep striving for your goals, live fully, and we'll catch you next time on the More Than Your Age podcast.